Empires don't vanish. They don't disappear into history like smoke in the wind. And they certainly don't die the way people do. No, empires shed their skin. It's a process of transformation, not annihilation. Think about it. When the flags fall, when the grand palaces burn to the ground, when the thrones of kings and emperors collapse into dust, what really happens? Power does not die. It moves. History's greatest illusion, the one we're all taught, is this, that when an empire falls, its power is gone forever. That is a lie, because every collapse is followed by a takeover. Every single fall creates a vacuum, a void where authority once stood, and every vacuum is filled quickly, silently, and often, invisibly. The story history rarely tells isn't about why empires fall. We know those stories. We've heard about the corruption, the invasions, the economic ruin. The real story, the one that truly matters, is who takes control after they do. When Rome fell, did power just evaporate from the Italian peninsula? No, the church, local warlords, and new kingdoms scrambled to pick up the pieces. When the Spanish Empire lost its grip on the Americas, did those vast territories become a power-free zone? Absolutely not. New nations rose, and other global players, like Britain and later the United States, stepped in to exert their influence. Power is like energy. It cannot be created or destroyed, only transferred from one form to another. The transfer might not be obvious at first. It might not be a general marching his army through the capital. It could be a banker signing a loan, a corporation buying up resources, or a new ideology capturing the hearts and minds of the people. The new power might not even have a flag or a defined border. This is the secret rhythm of history. It's a constant, relentless dance of succession. As one giant stumbles, others are already moving in the shadows, ready to claim its legacy, its wealth, and its influence. The names change, the maps are redrawn, but the game remains the same. The question is never asterisk, if asterisk power will return. The only question is asterisk, who asterisk will wield it next. So next time you read about the fall of a great empire, look closer. Look beyond the rubble and the ruins. Look for the subtle shifts, the quiet handshakes, the new currents of influence, because that's where you'll find the true story. Not the end of an era, but the beginning of a new one. What's the most dangerous moment for any civilization? It's not war, invasion, or even rebellion. The most perilous time is the moment right after collapse. Think about it. This is when the laws that once held everything together suddenly stop working. The institutions we relied on, like governments and courts, lose all their authority. And what do ordinary people think? They often believe that true freedom has finally arrived. The old rules are gone, so anything is possible, right? But history tells us a very different, much darker story. Collapse doesn't bring freedom. It unleashes a fierce, hidden competition for control. This critical moment has a name, the power vacuum. A power vacuum happens when a government or ruling authority falls apart, and there's nothing strong enough to immediately take its place. And just like a vacuum in nature, human nature hates that emptiness. It demands to be filled. So, what rushes into this void? 5 powerful forces instantly start vying for the top spot. First, you have military power, generals and warlords with guns and soldiers. Then, there's economic power, wealthy individuals and corporations who can buy loyalty and influence. You also have political elites, the cunning survivors of the old system who know how to play the game. Alongside them, ideological movements rise up, promising a new, perfect society, attracting passionate followers. And finally, don't forget foreign interests, other countries seeing a golden opportunity to expand their own influence. The terrifying part is that the public rarely sees this struggle for what it truly is. It doesn't always look like a chaotic street battle or an open war. Sometimes, this grab for power is disguised as humanitarian aid. Sometimes, it's presented as necessary reform. And most cleverly, it often comes wrapped in the comforting promise of stability. But we have to be wise to this. Behind every promise to restore order, behind every offer of stability, someone is quietly, strategically, taking control. The game is always being played, whether we see it or not. Ever feel like the world is ending? Well, people felt the exact same way when the Roman Empire collapsed. For centuries, Rome was the world. It meant order, roads, trade, and safety. When it fell, it must have seemed like the apocalypse. Roads crumbled, trade routes went silent, and magnificent cities emptied out, becoming ghost towns. It's easy to imagine total chaos, a complete power vacuum. But here's the thing about power, it never truly vanishes. It just changes hands. So, who scooped up the pieces of this shattered empire? The answer isn't a single person or group. Power fragmented. Local warlords, who could command loyalty through force, carved out their own little kingdoms. The Christian Church, with its organized structure and moral authority, stepped in, offering stability and guidance where the state had failed. Ambitious merchant elites, controlling what little trade remained, grew their wealth and influence, and many of Rome's own generals simply rebranded themselves, swapping their military titles for crowns and becoming the first kings of medieval Europe. The central Roman state was dead, but its ghost lived on. Think about it. The sophisticated systems Rome had built didn't just disappear overnight. They were repurposed. Roman law, a masterpiece of legal thinking, didn't vanish. It was adopted and adapted by the Church, becoming the basis for canon law that would govern Europe for 1,000 years. Those famous Roman roads, even as they fell into disrepair, still dictated the paths of pilgrims and merchants, shaping the new trade routes of the Middle Ages. And Roman taxes, they evolved into the feudal obligations peasants owed to their new lords. The emperor's throne was empty, but the mechanisms of control simply took on a new form. History textbooks often give us a simplified version. The empire collapsed, and the Dark Ages began. That paints a picture of pure, unrelenting chaos. And for the average person, life certainly became much harder and more dangerous. But that's only half the story. For the elites, for the ambitious and the opportunistic, collapse wasn't an end. It was a beginning. A crisis is a terrible thing to waste, right? When a powerful central authority disappears, it's like a giant reset button gets pushed. Old debts are suddenly erased. The rules of society are up for grabs, ready to be rewritten by whoever is bold enough to do it. Lifelong enemies of the state might find themselves with newfound freedom and power. Collapse is a brutal game of musical chairs, and it rewards those who were already positioning themselves, preparing for the moment the music stopped. This is a crucial lesson from history. Empires rarely fall in a single, dramatic explosion. They rot from the inside out, slowly, over decades, or even centuries. And all the while, in the shadows, new powers are quietly gathering strength, just waiting for their turn. When the Soviet Union collapsed, the world celebrated. It was a massive moment in history, and for so many, it felt like a clear victory. The narrative was simple. Communism was dead. Freedom had won. The immense power of the state had finally dissolved. But is that what really happened? If we look closer, past the falling statues and the cheering crowds, a different picture emerges. Who actually took control in the aftermath of the USSR? It wasn't the people, the everyday citizens who had hoped for a new beginning. Instead, control shifted, almost seamlessly, into new hands. Former party elites, the very people who were part of the old system, simply changed titles. Oligarchs emerged, seemingly overnight, snapping up state assets for pennies on the dollar. Financial intermediaries and foreign economic interests moved in, seeing a golden opportunity. The visible power of the state seemed to vanish, yes, but in its place, private power exploded. This is the crucial part we often miss. The factories didn't just disappear, they were acquired. The vast natural resources didn't vanish, they were controlled by a new, select few. Even the military didn't just dissolve. Its components were repurposed, sometimes by private interests, sometimes by new state-like entities. The red flag with the hammer and sickle came down, but the underlying system of control didn't die. It evolved, it changed its clothes. This is a tough pill to swallow because it complicates the simple story of good versus evil, freedom versus tyranny. But history teaches us a consistent lesson. Every collapse creates winners. Wars don't just create peace, they make generals. Financial crises don't just create hardship, they make billionaires. And revolutions, they often just make new rulers. The people who truly win in these massive shifts are rarely the ones chanting in the streets. They're the ones who are already positioning themselves, quietly, behind the scenes. They understand the fundamental rule of power vacuums. When a system breaks, it's not chaos for everyone. Those who control the money, the logistics, and the narrative, they are the ones who inevitably take over. They write the next chapter of history. It's a sobering thought, but it's essential for understanding how the world really works, not just how we wish it would. Here's a truth most people never realize. Governments are temporary. Systems are permanent. Think about it. Empires rise and fall, nations redraw their borders, and leaders come and go. But what really continues? trade, money keeps flowing, resources keep moving from one place to another, and labor, people like you and me, keep working. These are the systems that truly run the world. They're much older and more resilient than any single government. So the real question isn't, will the system survive a crisis? Of course it will. The real question is, who will own it next? This is why collapse often feels like chaos. There's a power struggle happening right under the surface. Control never truly disappears, it just changes hands. The game is always on, and the board is the world we live in. Ever wondered what happens after a great empire falls? History shows us it's not a free-for-all. Instead, three distinct types of rulers always rise from the ashes to divide the spoils. Understanding them is key to understanding power itself. First, you have the financial rulers. These are the masters of the invisible empire. They don't need armies or banners. Their power comes from controlling debt, currency, and credit. When a nation crumbles, they aren't holding weapons. They're holding the obligations, the IOUs. They own the future before it's even been built. By controlling the flow of money, they control who rebuilds, who gets funded, and who is left in financial ruin. Their kingdom is the ledger book, and their word is bond. Next, meet the narrative rulers. These are the storytellers, the weavers of reality. They control the media, the education system, and most importantly, the writing of history. After the dust settles, they are the ones who decide who the heroes and villains were. They shape public opinion, defining who is evil, who was justified, and ultimately, who deserves to lead next. Their battleground is the mind, and their weapon is the story. They can turn a tyrant into a savior, or a freedom fighter into a terrorist with the stroke of a pen. Finally, there are the enforcers. Their currency is power in its most raw form, security, stability, and, if necessary, violence. Sometimes they wear the uniforms of a new state police or army. Other times, they are unseen, operating in the shadows as private security or powerful gangs. They are the ones who guarantee that the new order, established by the financial and narrative rulers, is maintained. They provide the muscle, ensuring that the transition of power is not just a story, but a physical reality on the ground. These three forces, the bankers, the storytellers, and the enforcers, always work in concert to carve up what's left, while ordinary people are reeling from the collapse, hoping for justice and a return to normalcy. A very different game is being played. Collapse doesn't reward morality or fairness. It rewards preparedness. So why do ordinary people often lose everything? Their savings, their security, their voice. It's simple. They trust the system right up until the moment it dies. They believe the promises and follow the rules, unaware that the game is about to change. The elites, on the other hand, see the writing on the wall long before the collapse happens. They don't panic. They plan. They quietly move their money to safer assets. They build networks of influence, making sure they have allies in the right places. They secure their own protection, hiring the best enforcers. So, when the throne finally topples, they aren't scrambling in the chaos. They are already standing right behind the next one, ready to take their place in the new world they helped create. It's a sobering thought, but a powerful one. True power isn't just about sitting on the throne. It's about knowing how to build the next one. You hear it all the time, right? We're more advanced now. History won't repeat itself. But you know what? Every empire in history thought the exact same thing. They all believed they were the exception. The truth is, technology doesn't stop collapse. Progress doesn't prevent decay. And power just changes its methods. Think about it. Today, control doesn't require conquering armies marching through cities. It's much more subtle. It's about data. It's about debt. It's about dependency. And maybe most importantly, it's about narrative dominance, controlling the story everyone believes. Empires no longer fall just to invading forces. They fall to systems they created but can no longer control. History doesn't just repeat. It leaves clues, like a trail of breadcrumbs. And every single fallen empire ignored the same warnings. You've seen them. Rising, staggering inequality. A complete loss of trust in institutions and leaders. Endless, draining wars that seem to have no purpose. Economic manipulation that benefits a select few. And a deep cultural decay where shared values just fall apart. When you see these signs appearing together, it's not a sign that collapse is coming. It means it has already started. The foundations are already crumbling, even if the building still looks like it's standing tall. And while all this is happening, somewhere, quietly, someone is preparing to take control. They're watching, waiting, and planning. So, when the next great power inevitably stumbles and falls, we need to ask the right question. The question isn't, why did it collapse? We'll know why. The signs were there all along. The real question is, who is ready to rule after it does? Because power never truly dies. It doesn't just vanish into thin air. It only waits for the next throne to become available. Empires don't collapse with a big bang. There's no global announcement, no siren wailing in the streets, no moment where everyone agrees, yep, it's officially over. Instead, the end starts with a whisper. It begins when the budgets no longer add up, when the promises made by leaders are quietly broken, one by one. The grand buildings of government, the institutions we see every day, they all keep standing, but they stop working. They become hollow shells. And while all of us are busy arguing about day-to-day politics, caught up in the latest headlines, the real shift in power happens behind closed doors. This isn't a news story. History is filled with these moments. It's the precise instant when control slips away from the visible elected rulers and moves into the hands of those who were never on a ballot. There's a common saying, whoever controls the army controls the state. For a long time, that was absolutely true. But what happens after an empire starts to crumble? Armies become incredibly expensive. Soldiers need their salaries paid. Tanks and jets need fuel. An army needs a massive supply chain just to exist. When the state's finances fail, these armies don't just vanish into thin air. They start looking for new sponsors. This is the turning point where military power transforms from being the ruler into being a tool for hire. The people who truly hold power in this new landscape aren't necessarily the ones in uniform. The real rulers are those who can pay the soldiers, who can supply the weapons, and most importantly, who can guarantee immunity from consequences. This is exactly why, throughout history, when a great power falls, the generals rarely become the new emperors. Instead, they become something else entirely. High-level security contractors, they provide muscle for the new, unelected elite who can afford their services. The nature of power shifts from the ballot box and the battlefield to the bank account and the backroom deal. It's a quiet revolution, but it changes everything. Think about it. The patterns are there if you look closely. Have you ever noticed how history seems to repeat itself, but in a quieter, more subtle way? We're all familiar with the fall of great political empires. We see the crumbling walls, the abandoned palaces, the history books filled with tales of conquest and collapse. But what happens next? What rises from the ashes? The answer might surprise you. After political empires fall, economic empires rise. This transition is almost invisible. There are no flags, no parades, no grand speeches declaring a new ruler. It all happens quietly, through contracts and legal documents. Control doesn't shift through armies anymore. It shifts through debt restructuring, asset privatization, currency replacement, and trade dependency. Think about it. What used to belong to the state, to the people like water systems, power grids, even transportation networks is suddenly sold off. The justification? For stability. But we have to ask, stability for whom? It's rarely for the workers who might lose their jobs, or the citizens who might face higher prices for essential services. The real stability is for those who get to buy entire systems, entire national assets, at bargain bin prices. Debt is arguably the most powerful weapon ever invented. It doesn't destroy cities with bombs or burn buildings to the ground. It doesn't create martyrs that inspire rebellion. Instead, it creates something far more effective: obedience. When an empire collapses or a nation faces a crisis, it's vulnerable. The government desperately needs loans to stay afloat. The people desperately need jobs to survive. The entire system needs a massive injection of cash, of liquidity, just to keep functioning. And this is where the new empires are born. Whoever provides these things, the loans, the jobs, the liquidity, gets to write the new rules of the game. They dictate the terms. And unlike the emperors and kings of the past, these new rulers don't need to govern in the traditional sense. They don't need to manage the day-to-day affairs of a country. They only need one thing: repayment. The debt ensures their influence, their control, and their power, long after the old flags have been taken down. It's a new kind of empire, one built not on territory, but on balance sheets. When a system collapses, new leaders always seem to emerge from the dust. They arrive on a wave of promises: reform, renewal, a new beginning for everyone. We see them on our screens, hear their speeches, and for a moment, we feel a flicker of hope. But if you look closely at history, you'll notice a disturbing pattern. These new leaders rarely bring new power. More often than not, they are simply managing power on behalf of someone else. The throne might look occupied, the office filled, but the real authority isn't there. It's hidden somewhere else. You see, modern power doesn't sit on a gilded throne. It doesn't need a crown or a scepter. It sits in boardrooms, in the sterile quiet of international banks, within complex networks of influence, and in the fine print of backroom agreements. In the ancient world, control required visibility. Kings and emperors had to be seen by the people. Their authority had to be constantly displayed through grand parades and public ceremonies. But today, true power thrives in the shadows. It prefers invisibility. The grand palace has been replaced by something far more subtle and effective: the control of the narrative. After a major collapse, the most crucial battle isn't fought with armies, but with words. Whoever controls the story controls the future. They get to decide who caused the fall. They handpick the villains to be blamed and select the heroes to be trusted. This is why, after every great upheaval, the first thing to be rebuilt is history itself. The past is meticulously rewritten, a new version is created, all to justify the legitimacy of the future rulers. Events are reframed, heroes are manufactured, and convenient scapegoats are found. The story of what happened is reshaped to fit the story of who should be in charge next. It's a timeless game of power, where controlling the past is the key to owning the future. We're often told revolutions are the people's ultimate victory, a grand reset button for society. But is that really what happens? Let's look closer. Successful revolutions aren't just spontaneous uprisings. They need serious resources. We're talking about funding, complex logistics, tight organization, and even protection for key players. Where does all that come from? It means someone powerful, someone with influence and capital, is almost always involved behind the scenes. History teaches us a pretty harsh lesson here. Revolutions are great at removing rulers, but they don't really remove the system of rule itself. They just change who's in charge. Think about it. After the dust settles from a major upheaval, what do we usually see? Inequality doesn't just disappear. In many cases, it actually gets worse. The promise of freedom for all often becomes freedom for a select few who align with the new order. And a new elite, sometimes even more ruthless than the old one, emerges surprisingly quickly. The people fight the battles, but it's the elites who reorganize the power structure afterward. The game board is reset, but the rules of the game stay the same. After a system collapses, there's always this beautiful, hopeful dream of decentralization. People imagine a future of local control, truly fair systems, and shared authority. A world where power is given back to the communities. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Power absolutely hates being broken apart. It has a natural tendency to reconsolidate, to pull itself back together into a central point. Why does this happen every single time? Well, for one, centralized power is incredibly efficient. It can make decisions quickly and mobilize resources on a large scale. Fragmented power, on the other hand, can be messy and unstable. And in a world driven by capital, stability is king. Money flows towards stable environments. So, after a period of chaos and uncertainty, society doesn't just want freedom. It craves order. People are desperate for a return to normalcy. And whoever can step in and provide that order, that stability, can take control with very little resistance. The cycle begins anew. Have you ever wondered what happens after an empire falls? The history books might close a chapter, but the story is far from over. Collapsed empires are never truly left alone. They don't just fade into memory, they transform. They become strategic locations, resource zones, and battlegrounds for influence. It's a modern Game of Thrones, played not with armies, but with economics and soft power. In today's world, foreign powers don't typically invade directly anymore. The age of conquest with flags and soldiers has evolved. Now, they invest, they advise, they assist. It's a subtle, more insidious form of control. Think about it. Every aid package, every loan, every trade deal comes with conditions, both spoken and unspoken. Every partnership, while promising mutual benefit, often creates a subtle web of dependence. Slowly but surely, the fallen empire finds itself in a new role. It's no longer a sovereign power calling its own shots. It becomes a market for foreign goods, a buffer zone between rival powers, or a tool to be used in a larger geopolitical game. Its economy, its politics, and even its culture can become extensions of another nation's will. The strings are pulled from afar, often so gently that they are barely felt until it's too late. This brings us to a crucial point about power. The most powerful empires in history weren't always the largest in terms of territory. They were the most embedded, and this is the blueprint for modern empires. They don't need to occupy land, govern populations directly, or raise their flags over foreign capitals. That's old-school thinking. Instead, they embed themselves into the very fabric of other nations. They weave their influence into financial systems, controlling the flow of money. They integrate their technology, making others dependent on their innovations. They shape the infrastructure, building the roads, ports, and digital networks that define a country's future. And they dominate global supply chains, deciding who gets what and when. You don't see these new empires ruling from a throne. You don't hear their decrees from a palace, but you feel their presence everywhere, in the products you buy, the news you consume, the technology you use, and the economic policies that shape your life. It's a quiet, invisible dominance, but it is dominance nonetheless. The empire hasn't vanished. It's just learned to wear a very convincing disguise. We often expect power to look dramatic. We imagine coups, battles, and grand declarations on television. But that's the stuff of movies. Real takeovers happen slowly, almost silently. They look boring from the outside. They sound technical, hidden in words that are designed to soothe, not to alarm. Words like reform, stability, and structural adjustment. By the time the average person realizes that control has fundamentally changed, it's already permanent. They've been living in a new reality without ever being asked for their consent. When the collapse finally becomes obvious, when the dam breaks, the consequences are devastating. Savings that took a lifetime to build suddenly lose their value. Jobs that seemed secure disappear overnight. Public services we took for granted, like reliable electricity or clean water, start to vanish. And who do people blame? They blame the politicians they see on the news. They blame corruption. They blame foreign enemies. But the real cause is often much simpler and much more profound. They lived under a system they didn't control. And when that system changed owners, they weren't consulted. The collapse exposes a truth that many of us try to avoid. We think we live in nations, bound by a common culture and a flag. But in reality, most of us just live inside systems. Economic systems, financial systems, political systems, and these systems don't exist to serve citizens. They exist to serve their controllers. It's a hard pill to swallow, but it's crucial to understand. The loyalty of a system is not to the people within it, but to the people who own and operate it. Every empire throughout history has believed it was unique. Every generation falls for the same comforting lie. This time is different, but the cycle repeats itself with a predictable, almost mechanical rhythm. First, there's expansion, a period of growth and prosperity. Then comes saturation, when the system reaches its limits and growth slows. This is followed by decay, as internal contradictions and inefficiencies begin to tear it apart from the inside. Then comes the collapse, the event everyone sees. And finally, the transfer of control. The names change, the flags change, the language and the justifications change. But the underlying structure, the architecture of power, never does. So, after the dust settles, who really takes charge? Control doesn't go to the people marching in the streets. It doesn't go to the passionate revolutionaries or the wide-eyed idealists. It goes to those who prepared early. It goes to those who controlled essential resources while everyone else was distracted. It goes to the quiet few who truly understood how the systems worked, not just how they were supposed to work. The real rulers never announce themselves. They don't need a parade or a coronation, because by the time you're forced to ask the question, who's in charge now? They already are. Understanding this isn't about being pessimistic. It's about being realistic. It's about learning to see the world not for what it appears to be, but for what it is. It's about recognizing the real levers of power, which are often hidden in plain sight, disguised as boring bureaucracy or complex finance. By understanding these patterns, we can better navigate the changes that are always coming. We can learn to build resilience for ourselves and our communities, not by fighting the last war, but by preparing for the next transfer of control.